Under the influence of psychedelic chemistry, people often see these actual creatures. They think they're seeing hominids or composite animals, with the head of one thing, the body of another thing. It's very hard to believe if you haven't experienced it firsthand, but it's well documented in science that this is quite a reliable effect of this chemistry on the human brain. And you can see evidence of it carved into religious structures around the world. A common explanation for this from scientists as to why you might eat a psychedelic fungus or a psychedelic plant and then see these creatures is that the chemistry is just trying to confuse your brain and generally send animals away. But I think it's much more nuanced than this, and what I reckon these animals that we're seeing are is a result of a phenomenon in nature called mimicry. You see this in the physical world. When a bee sees a bee orchid, it actually mistakes the flower for a female bee because the flower has evolved to look like a female bee. So the male bee of that species tries to mate with it, and in doing so helps the plant's pollination. When a bird sees an owl butterfly, it notices these psychedelic-looking eye motifs on the butterfly's wings, and instead of chasing it as it normally would, it gets scared because the eyes obviously look like owl eyes and owls are its predator, so it flies away. And you've probably heard of snakes that just evolve markings that make them look poisonous, because it's easier to mimic markings that make you look dangerous than it is to evolve venom that actually makes you dangerous. It's cheaper in terms of resources. So mimicry is something we've documented in the physical world. It's one of many techniques used by animals, plants and fungi to help with various different jobs: reproduction, survival, the protection of resources, and so on. In psychedelic visions, I'm suggesting plants and fungi can masquerade as something different to what they are, but purely in our perception. So they don't always have to evolve to look like something else physically. They can just make animals perceive them as something else. They don't mean to do this consciously, just like the butterfly doesn't mean to have eye spots on its wings. But our brains have co-evolved with their chemistry to make us think we're seeing something different to what's actually there in front of us. And it's triggered by us eating a piece of them. Now, that explanation might sound reductive to people who've been to this psychedelic realm, because sometimes they report that it seems more real than reality. And there are spirits there who sort of give you this deep sense of recognition that resonates within your soul. It's a magical place, and it can't really be described in words. It's certainly not just a series of signals that are pushing you from one place to another. If you understand, though, how this works, it dawns on you, yes, this may be a language of symbols and archetypes written into our perception, but these are forged from the collective experiences of other humans and other organisms. And some might argue that does give them a kind of sentience. That's more of a philosophical question to get into elsewhere. These things are real in a sense, and this is the voice of the ecosystem talking as a whole directly to our species about its fundamental mechanics and making transparent our role within its operation. To give you an example of what I mean, how these signals basically tell animals what to do where for the good of the environment as a whole, let's think of the bird who sees that owl butterfly. So butterflies are crucial pollinators. If the birds eat too many of them, some of the plants are not going to be pollinated and they're going to suffer and maybe die out. And so by being shooed away from a percentage of butterflies by these eye markings, the birds are eating just the right amount of butterflies to maintain the stability of the overall ecosystem, which directly benefits the birds as well as the butterflies. Now, the environment isn't 100% stable, it's gradually evolving over time, but it does need a certain degree of stability, otherwise it would just break down and not be able to move in any direction. essentially the syntax of what the birds are seeing is misleading compared to what's actually in front of them, but the semantics of what these visual cues affect in their behavior has veracity in terms of environmental integrity. So when this happens internally, when we eat psychedelic chemistry, this is a sense perception in itself. It syncs our compulsions and behaviors up with the needs of the ecosystem. And so it gives animals a natural kind of morality because they feel compelled towards behaviors that preserve the organisms around them. Just like the internal pain and pleasure signals in your body are vital to maintaining it. They tell you to stop doing this and to do more of that and so on. The psychedelic messages that come from external chemical signaling also say, go away, come here, stay here, that kind of thing. And this externally regulated sense perception that's being transmitted through external hormones, if you will, joins your pain and pleasure to the needs of the environment that supports you. It gives you an external nervous system. Did I say that already? I probably did. So when we humans eat some magic mushrooms and then we see a load of human-looking eyes all around us and think, oh my God, I didn't sign up for this, because that's a very common thing that happens. You see all these eyes and you think, what is this about? Why is this written into my consciousness like this? I think we should assume this is the personhood of the fungus becoming visible and essentially stating, I'm alive like you, so just as you wouldn't tread on another animal, don't tread on me. You know, I have as much personhood as a recognizable animal has. The fungus is not deliberately sending that signal. The ecosystem as a whole has shaped our brain and its chemistry so that this perception occurs because the ecosystem benefits from animals who understand where to tread and where not to tread. So why is it evolving in this way? Why can't we just read the signals that plants send to each other and fungi send to each other? Because they don't have brains like we do. They communicate in different ways. Wouldn't it be better if we could just apprehend these signals and understand them on their own terms, instead of which we're reading them through a sort of language? We're getting symbols in our perception and they represent other things. Well, these symbols come from the dominant set of instincts we have to read our own kingdom, the animal kingdom. We've got very strong instincts about other animals. You know, we recognize yelps of pain or happiness in other animals. We know if something's running towards us, it's not afraid of us, it might be happy to see us, it might be attacking. We know what looks scary and what looks cute. So it's kind of cheaper in terms of how much brain we have to carry around with us. If we can just read the plant kingdom and the fungal kingdom using the same circuitry we already have. For example, we know that a spider shape equals jump back. A snake isn't something we warm to. Sharp teeth are a definite red flag. So if a plant or fungus benefits from shooing us away from it over time, the two of us might evolve so that when we eat a piece of it, we see a hominid with 8 arms like a spider and sharp teeth scaring us off. Or a hominid with the body of a big, strong man and the head of a snake. Or more commonly with dimethyltryptamine, that's a chemical present in some plants. We might just see a bunch of snakes generally slithering around. These things are giving us the message, go away. And there are many variations on this. Sinister aliens, demons, jokers with sharp horns and ill intent, telling Joe Rogan to get over himself and all that sort of stuff. Modern humans who've populated their brains with the artifacts of culture may also see their learned religious iconography coming up because we have filed different things we've learned in areas pertaining to deity or pertaining to predator. So whereas in the old days this chemistry might just kind of hit on everyone's idea of what a predator is because they were seeing a much more limited range of different things. Today, people's responses may be different depending on what they filed where through their lifetime. Now, even though there's no actual snake here, the message you're getting is the manifestation of something that does exist. That's why I wouldn't say this stuff isn't real. This is a dynamic across time. In this case, it's a dynamic that's stating your ancestors and my ancestors didn't work well together. Your people tried doing what you're doing now and it failed in some way, and I'm the result. I'm a bouncer who's had to evolve here to stop you doing the same thing. So again, this is a temporal dynamic that is made visible through a kind of avatar that we recognize as a deity. A hominid that represents a dynamic tells us what to do where that we really need to listen to. Sometimes plants and fungi benefit from shooing us away, but other times they benefit from hanging on to us and keeping us around. As you know, animals fulfill a number of tasks for plants and fungi. We can carry and drop off seeds and spores. We can enrich the soil with our manure. Of course, they've got mycelium and they've got roots, but they can't get everywhere, whereas we have feet. We might have picked up some nutrients from a faraway place and they'd quite like to hang on to us until that manure passes through us and they get it on their soil. So how might they do this if they want to keep us where we are? Well, we've evolved to find birds and butterflies beautiful because both can lead us to the fruit we eat as well. So perhaps when we eat a fungus or a plant that can benefit from us staying where we are, we'll feel that euphoria and desire to relax that we often feel, but we might also see a hominid with beautiful wings that we recognize as a loving force, and we call this an angel or a fairy, and it registers as something sacred and something that brings about good fortune, though we don't know how, and something to be followed and to treat with reverence. What's in it for us when we read these chemicals? Well, for one thing, we're protecting our environment without even thinking about it, so that's in it for us. But this also, when you think about it, makes every environment we go to become legible in terms of our relationship to it. If we think of a fungus that grows somewhere we've never been before, so our ancestors have never been to this place before, and actually the place it grows is really dangerous, and when we first encounter it, because it contains psilocybin, we might actually respond to that psilocybin because we've been co-evolving with other fungi that contain psilocybin. And so many of us might see the fairies and feel very relaxed and lie down in that area, but those who do will be eaten by the predators, so they won't have any descendants. Some in the group may be a little bit allergic to one of the chemicals in that fungus overall. Not the psilocybin, we've been evolving with that elsewhere, but something else in this new mushroom. And they might actually get a sense of paranoia and unease when they eat it, and they'll be thinking, is that a predator? Is that a predator? Is that a predator? And actually, they might respond so quickly when a predator does come along that they survive and they pass on that tendency to the next generation. Then there'll be a few who are completely allergic to this fungus and just throw it up, so they don't even relax at all. They feel none of the effects of the psilocybin. They'll all survive because they've remained vigilant in problem-solving mode and will run from any predators that come around. So all the descendants will either throw up that fungus or they'll feel quite paranoid from eating it. And that's how these places become legible, because can you imagine going to a place, you eat the things there and they either make you throw up or feel paranoid? You'll think, this place gives me the creeps, and you'd be right about it. The very presence of psychedelic chemistry tells you this is a commonly held sense perception that registers to animals through experience, but possibly not just through eating plants and fungi. There's another way that might work as well to help animals plug in, and I'll put that in the description just because this video would be too long otherwise. Savanna-dwelling humans evolved to relax when they ate psilocybin-containing fungi that grows on the dung of cattle. And in that instance, it's because that benefits them. The people who actually chilled out and lay down next to cattle were much less likely to be eaten by big cats compared with the ancestors we had who made their camps far away from cattle. Given this choice, the cats tend to pursue what they know, which is the cattle. So just because this fungus kind of pinned a lot of us down next to a big group of cattle, we might have sort of got that knowledge or just that habit from the psychedelic chemistry that happened to be around. And that's why that relationship has been selected for. It's one of the rare psychedelics that we just need to eat for it to work. DMT or DMT precursors clearly used to work in the body at some point because we've got the brain circuitry to decode it. And there's speculation we may have been able to manufacture DMT internally, perhaps from other chemicals like tryptophan in plants. And so DMT, and so in the old days also perhaps its precursors, seems to have the strongest effect on us of all the psychedelics, transporting humans to what seems to be a different realm altogether. And it makes sense because in the rainforest, it would be keeping us in one place with euphoria and these friendly hominids that are commonly reported. So when we were under the influence, we would relax in the trees that were feeding us fruit. We benefited from staying where we were amongst the fruit, and so this circuitry evolved. And it shows us very intricate, detailed visions that have had time to come about. Once we moved to the savannah, though, those who read DMT from, say, the acacia tree, for instance, or who manufactured it from other plant chemistry, would die out, because savanna trees didn't have enough fruit to sustain them in the way that rainforest trees did. I actually have a correction for the Psychedelic Map Theory series. I suggested that monoamine oxidase itself may have been selected for in humans when they moved to the savannah. This is an enzyme we have in our gut that blocks dimethyltryptamine's pathway to our brain. So it disables the effect of dietary DMT. And my reasoning was DMT clearly worked at some point. We've got the circuitry in the brain to read it. And then it stopped ever reaching our brain, and we don't feel its effects today if we eat it because of the monoamine oxidase. I've had a couple of comments on that MAO is present in varying degrees in other apes. So it's not that doorstopper itself in the gut that seems to have radically changed. But what is likely to have changed when we moved to the savannah was the presence of dietary MAO inhibitors, disabling agents that remove the doorstopper and allow DMT to reach the brain. The rainforest is far more abundant in MAO inhibitors, so apes there may be activating the DMT in their diets more often through eating a wider variety of plants. It hasn't been that well studied so far. On the savannah, monoamine oxidase inhibitors are far less common, so the doorstopper itself was probably there before. What's more likely to have changed is that we pretty much stopped disabling it for the most part once we moved to the savannah. So just to restate it, if the deities and the composite animals and all that, if these are flashcards or avatars that represent genuine dynamics across time, ways to behave that have worked well for our ancestors, then once these visions faded after our descent from the trees, after our fall, as it were, and I've gone into more detail about this in the last video, so too did our external nervous system start to fade, massive pieces of it. We interact so little with plants and fungi now that we've really lost this ability to read our environment, and that was what imbued us with ecological morality. That's what made our pain and pleasure line up with the needs of the organisms around us. So from that point on, we could fudge a way of living. We could create our own religious codes of what we thought people should do where for the greater good in order to preserve the environment upon which we relied, and we would use very similar symbolism to those things we'd see in the fading psychedelic states. Once these things really faded in the whole population and you didn't even have an outlier shaman who could still tune in, we just sort of wholesale had to admit we haven't got a clue how anything works. And so we started moving from religion, which just looked absurd after a while, to science, where we would go and interrogate this opaque landscape around us using rational thought and just try to work out through guesswork and trial and error and all sorts of tests what everything was about and how it related to each other. We can only use frameworks now that pertain to this style of rational thought. So we're doing all this even now in an imperfect condition, as religions say, that is essentially sinful because we're perceptually impaired. We don't mean to be sinful. We'd love to be a good force in the world, but because we can't read how anything works around us, we tend to destroy our environment even when we know we're doing it. It just doesn't register through our nervous system that we are. Now, there's so much excitement about psychedelics. I just want to add one footnote. Because of this phenomenon where therapists in the West, where we don't really know what we're doing because we haven't got a long history of using psychedelics as part of our culture, they are nonetheless using these substances on clients. They're not supposed to, it's illegal in a lot of Western countries, but often they're saying, okay, you've had this experience in a psychedelic state, it probably means this. And all too often, people who have a bad experience are encouraged to go back and keep reliving it with the impression that they're going to resolve something by continually doing this. And with older cultures who've evolved alongside this chemistry and they work with the plants and fungi, I would have more faith they know what they're doing, but even then, they sometimes are commercially driven. The message you get from a plant or a fungus may be completely different depending on what you've eaten. When you go to Peru or something, they do tell you, go on this diet, because that sort of neutralizes this effect. But if you've eaten a load of bananas and you're going to then excrete potassium in your urine, a fungus might not like that because the potassium is going to mess up the microbiome of its surrounding soil. So when you eat this particular mushroom, it's going to have evolved to react with the potassium in your stomach to show you a snake man, to make sure you run away before you pee in that area. But if you came back another day and you'd eaten something else that it did like, that same mushroom might have evolved to mix with those desirable chemicals in your stomach to make you see that sorcerer woman from the cartoon He-Man, you know, this beautiful female goddess with feathers. So if you were doing this same thing in a clinical setting in London, because somebody you went to was operating illegally, and they claim to know what's going on, you might have a very negative impression of the world on the first day, and that would be wrong. It would be about the bananas. But then you might have a very positive effect on another day and think that your tech job was the answer to the meaning of life. And that would also be wrong. And it's more about, you know, manure and urine and stuff. So that's what concerns me a bit about Westerners wading in. I'm doing a similar thing here, sort of imposing human-centric schemata on how this stuff might work, when it might be wiser to just try and observe it and retain some of the mystery about it. But I'm driven to discuss it with others because I think there's an unstoppable drive to utilize this chemistry for our own purposes as we see them. And a lot of people have put forward theories about what or who these creatures are. I often find those strange if they have nothing to do with the plants or fungi they come from. That's where I think older cultures are wiser. So here's a possible biological explanation. People say we're living in a simulation that has been made by humans, or, you know, a human-like alien intelligence could actually put us in a simulation. But this interspecies ontological matrix of biological chemistry that interlocks between every living thing, that kind of laughs its arse off at that idea, because no single species could create a simulation anywhere near as well designed as this one. So anyway, that's enough speculation. Thanks very much for listening. Please leave your comments below, even if you have the unedifying task of explaining to me why this logic has been discussed and is flawed. I'll look forward to reading your thoughts as they come in. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.